You can now find me on RoadStr, the app connecting people through cars.
Hello everybody. I think it's fair to say that us YouTubers do have a tendency for exaggeration. There are many phrases we like to wheel out far more often than we probably should. Things like a dream opportunity, once in a lifetime, never to be missed, are all things that if you say them on a weekly basis, do rather lose their meaning. However, what I've got in store today really is the stuff of dreams. Allow me to explain why. Naturally, this car is a very big part of why today has been quite so special, but it isn't the only thing. To fully explain just what's going on, we need to start really at the beginning. 33 years ago, I was born. Well then, skip over some of the boring stuff. 16 years ago, I got my driving licence. Then 15 years ago, I went off to film school in mighty London, my head full of all the dreams of the grandeur and splendour of Hollywood. 13 years ago, I then graduated from film school and went into the world of work. Barely a year after graduation, and I thought I'd already made it big. You could go to a cinema and see a film that I myself had shot. You could see my name at the bottom of a poster. You could walk into your local Blockbuster, because they still existed then, and find me as a credit on the back of not one, but 2 DVDs. Then, only 6 months later, my life completely collapsed. A change in personal circumstances meant that I had to leave London, and something happened that caused me a financial ruin that took years to recover from. I had to retreat to the countryside and essentially move back in with family. However, I decided to take what little pleasure I could from the circumstance, and because my car insurance had halved, I used the opportunity to buy something that was twice as expensive to insure. So out went my Peugeot 407 SW 1.6 HDI, and in came my beloved BMW E46 330ci Club Sport. I continued working in film, taking all the jobs that came my way, and my passion for cars remained strong, although back then anything sexier than my 330 seemed a lifetime away. 9 years ago, on the 7th of July 2013, an episode of Top Gear was released. With me being in the film industry, the thing that I was interested in, and the reason I had tuned in that particular day, was a tribute to BBC's television centre, then about to be closed. There was also a bit on the rather wild and wonderful BAC Mono, but the programme was rounded out with a section by Jeremy Clarkson, in which he addressed the suggestion that you can no longer enjoy a truly fast car. To counter this, he decided to take a Ferrari F12 in order to prove that the golden age of the supercar was still with us, and that these were something you could still enjoy, even in rather inclement weather. The image of this car was seared in my mind, if for no other reason than I didn't remember any bit of Hertfordshire I'd visited ever looking quite like that. At home, things were a little more down to earth. After a few successful jobs, I managed to upgrade my BMW 330 to a 645, and then later a Z4M Coupe. But I eventually decided that that was too frivolous a car to own, and the money would be better spent investing into kit to try and get a little bit more money from some bigger and better jobs. So I sold everything interesting that I had and poured all my finance into making my business the best it could be. Unfortunately, things didn't quite pan out how I'd imagined, and 8 years ago my glorious 5-year plan for instant Hollywood domination was looking like a bad joke. All I had on the driveway for my efforts was a 1.4 litre diesel Peugeot van with 70 lazy French horses. I knew things had to change, but I really wasn't sure what to do or how to do it. I thought I'd change things up a bit by writing and directing my own short film as opposed to simply making them for others. Naturally, cars were a central theme, and I put a call out on Pistonheads for anybody with something interesting who might be willing to be a part of it. Somebody did get in touch who happened to own a bright red Ferrari F12, and naturally I said, yes please, will you come and be a part of this? Unfortunately, the film didn't go anywhere. A very enjoyable experience, and the only real memento I have of it is some pictures from behind the scenes, one of which I use in my intro to this very day. However, the car I remembered very fondly, because even though it had now been a few years since that piece on Top Gear, it looked just as spectacular in the flesh as it had on TV. I eventually had the realization that my film career was a failure. Despite massive investments in both time and money, I was now working on smaller films for less money than I had 5 years earlier. And really, I had no one to blame but myself. I was absolutely terrified that I had spent so very long learning a skill set that was going to be absolutely wasted. So, in an act of near desperation, I embarked on this crazy idea to start a YouTube channel. I sold all of the kit that I built up over the last near decade and invested in a small camera and a Lotus Evora, which between them cost me £75,000. And in the first year, I earned 130. Not thousand, just pounds. I was deeply concerned that I had made the stupidest decision of my life, trashed a still somewhat viable career and invested in something that was a pipe dream. But like any man who felt lost, I simply refused to ask for directions, marched on regardless, and thought it'll all be fine in the end if I just keep going. Though eventually, as I'm sure you can see, the money did eventually sort itself out, that wasn't really why I persevered. Over the years, I made many friends, I'm sure made a few enemies too, but the most important thing was that I felt like, at long last, I actually had control over my own destiny. And most important of all, I was actually happy. I think it's fair to say that the reality of YouTube has turned out far better than I could have possibly imagined. 2 years ago, I reviewed this very Ferrari F12. 2 months ago, I bought it. Right about now, the biggest problem that I really have is trying to maintain a balance between wanting to share my joy with everybody that I come across and not being an absolutely insufferable git. I hope that the introduction of this video has maybe helped a little bit with the latter, or made it an awful lot worse. But the one thing I really want you to all know is that this was never ever a given for me, and the reason I'm so keen to talk to people about these cars and indeed drive them at every given opportunity is because that's what they're there for. My life has had many ups and downs, and I'm sure it'll have plenty more of both, and I don't ever want to be that person who says, you know what, I could have had a Ferrari, but I chose not to. I'm very lucky to be in the position where this is Ferrari number 3, and I know that maybe one day they will all be gone, but at least I can enjoy it while I could. Today really is a simple invitation to all of you to share in my joy and happiness, because it's one of those things that I can give away without losing any of my own. And I have plenty of cause to celebrate, because recently the channel surpassed 200,000 subscribers and I made my 1,000th video. So, how then to celebrate 2 such momentous occasions? Well, we've got one half sorted because we have the dream car. But to make this complete, we also need the dream venue. And there was really only ever one that I had in mind. Welcome to Hertfordshire, only 40 miles from London, and whatever the weather, absolutely spectacular, be it slightly gloomy and misty as it is today, snowy as it was yesterday, or sunny as the locals tell me it was on one day in July 1976. Behind the camera we have the town of Letchworth, but a few other local landmarks seem worth mentioning. Down there, in the mist between the rolling hills, you have the bustling metropolis of Stevenage, birthplace of one Lewis Hamilton and known locally as the Monaco of Britain. In fact, when you see the roads that he grew up on, it's no surprise whatsoever he developed a passion for driving. Nearby also we have the ancient Roman town of St Albans, formerly Verulamium, and also just over there, Hemel Hempstead, holder of the Guinness record for the world's most impressive firework display. But petrol heads, I'm sure, are to recognise it instantly as the site of that Top Gear review, filmed 9 years ago, almost to the day, on this very spot. And where Aston Martin owners have their little Skyfall lay-by out at Glencoe, for F12 owners, I think this is motoring Mecca.
There's an awful lot of things going through my head right now, and if there were one word to really summarise all of them, it's emotional. So often these things we want to go and do, we build up expectation for, to the point where they simply couldn't meet them. But today is one of those really, truly rare and special moments where not only have expectations been met, they've been exceeded. A lot of people think that I'm simply some sort of jumped-up Clarkson wannabe, and I admit, I'm about 30% that. But the truth is, for a very long time, what I was actually Clarkson's cameraman wannabe. And now, in this wonderful, weird and wacky life that I have, I actually get to be both. Greedy, I know, but a lot of fun. I am a great believer in the mystical healing power of the automobile. I think these are more than a mere collection of pieces of metal and oil. They can do things to you that make you genuinely, truly feel alive. Yesterday was one such moment. As you can probably tell, the weather today is a little bit warmer. Yesterday it looked spectacular, but was a touch too cold to actually try and get cameras to stick to the car, hence the revisit. And let's be honest here, with a road like this, if you had an opportunity to come back, you would, wouldn't you? There's a little section of road back there that in the original review the F12 carved through, looking absolutely magnificent. Now, one common misconception with many of my videos is that in the drive-by shots it's actually me driving the car, when in fact 99% of the time that's not the case. It's only ever really with press cars that there's even a chance it's me behind the wheel. Most of the time it's the owner of the car that I'm reviewing. That's led to some very entertaining comments where people discuss how it is that I've chosen to drive somebody else's car, when in actual fact it wasn't me driving at all. It was me behind the camera. And so yesterday I got my friend George to come and help with filming. He selflessly took a day out of work to come along here and drive the Ferrari up and down the road. An act I think that was so kind and generous, I've already written into the Vatican to see if we can get him canonised. As he was helping me drive a Ferrari, we'll probably succeed. The point, though, is that I got to experience something very, very few car owners do, particularly car obsessives. I got to see my car driving past on a piece of road that I recognised from that Top Gear film almost a decade ago. And you know something? It looked and sounded spectacular. It virtually moved me to tears. It might actually have moved me to tears, but I really couldn't tell because the rain and the snow was coming in pretty hard, to the point that all the gel in my hair kind of ran out and I wound up gelling my own eyebrows. Not a good look. So then, onto the car. What is the Ferrari F12berlinetta really like? Perhaps it won't surprise you to hear, it is sensational. Many people call this a supercar. I personally believe they're wrong. There's elements of supercar in here, for sure. The looks, the drama, the noise, the power. And it is a car kind of dominated by its numbers. But today, we're not going to talk about that too much. In another video, I'll go through all of the nitty-gritty, the nerdy detail, all those little bits about the car that I love to gawp over. But this isn't a video about all of that stuff. This is a video about the raw emotions, the feel of the drive, and what this car can do to you. The fact is, a lot of people, including St. Clarkson, talk about this car as being too much, too powerful, a car you cannot enjoy on the road. But I disagree with that. Yes, it's very powerful. Yes, it's very fast. But this isn't a car you have to absolutely cane to enjoy. Today, in fact, I'm driving the car in wet mode, and at no point really have I felt like I'm getting anything less than the full experience. And what's that like? Well, this. Does that look or sound like a car not being enjoyed? It doesn't feel like a car not being enjoyed. I'm having the time of my life. The funny thing is that the F12 actually feels really well suited to this road. I drove the Lamborghini Huracan Evo here last year, and actually on some of the more demanding sections that car was truly unpleasant, mostly because it had a nasty habit of tapping the ground. This hasn't done that once. There have been a few bum-clenching moments, but they've all been unjustified. In fact, the road being slightly damp means that it's just that little bit more challenging, and for me, that makes it a little bit more engaging, a little bit more involving. Special mention needs to go to the tyres. This car currently has Michelin Pilot Sport 4S on, a brilliant set of rubber that is well loved by many petrolheads for a very good reason. In the dry, they're absolutely superb, and in the wet and the cold, they're not that bad either. It's 5 degrees out there today, and if this car was riding on the original Pirelli P0s, I'd probably be struggling. But it's not, and I'm not. I think I'm going to start a group called the Manatino Appreciation Society, because one of the things I think people get wrong with these cars is how to use this little switch down here. The problem is, I think there's a little bit too much bravado when it comes to cars like this, and so people think if they're driving it in anything less than race mode, that's somehow a sign that they are a lesser human being, they're unworthy of the car. That's just not true. The way I think we need to start thinking about this, and the way that Ferrari talk about their traction control, as Lotus do, is not as a safety aid, but as a performance one. As it is still a little bit wet out there, I probably could put it in sport mode and soon will. There's no reason to not have it in wet. The power isn't being held back. The traction control only intervenes when it's necessary, but by putting the car in wet mode, you're telling it what the conditions are like, what your expectations are, and therefore it knows to intervene maybe a little quicker than it otherwise would. Shifts also are smoothed out just a little bit at lower speeds. At full chat, you still get a nice quick shift accompanied by a very satisfying crack, but unlike some BMWs when you've got their transmission in its sportier settings, when you do ask for an upshift, it doesn't jolt the car sideways and make you feel like you're going to have an accident in a straight line. Steering is another element of these cars often discussed. Yes, it's very fast. However, it's a lot more feelsome than even I probably gave it credit for. Get to a certain speed, which isn't all that high, 40, 50 mile an hour, and it does actually take on quite a nice weighting. However, it does take you some time to acclimatise for it. For that reason, I believe that when I first reviewed this car, the Pirelli tyres on it may not have helped, I didn't think the steering was all that good. Now, I think it's actually one of the best things about the car. If, though, you thought that I'm so totally smitten with this I could see past any faults, you'd be wrong. The standard stereo is absolutely atrocious, which I'm sure many of you will think is of no consequence whatsoever, but for me it is, and I have plans to fix that. More troubling, though, is the brakes. I'm not a big fan of carbon ceramics. When they're really quite cold, if you've been driving on the motorway saying you haven't needed them for a little bit, there is about a second of sheer unbridled terror. When you ask them to slow the car down, and they do absolutely nothing. Eventually they do grip and work well, but when they are cold and unloved, they can be a little bit sketchy. This car, I believe, may need some new pads. The discs are in fine condition and the pads look like they've got plenty of meat on them. But if you're really pressing on, going at a speed we cannot achieve today, and you ask for that full stopping power, you suddenly find the car not really delivering it. Give it a good sort of 10 or 11 goes and eventually it'll do what you want. But the first try, it's terrifying. You just keep pushing the pedal and pushing and pushing, and it does nothing. I spoke to Meridian about this, and they said that what can happen is essentially the pad wears itself into a state where what it's doing is giving off a gas, so it's not actually properly adhering to the disc, hence the lack of improved retardation. These seats I'm also a little bit on the fence about. For the 599, you've got only one option: the best seats in the world, a perfect blend of comfort and sporty. For this, you could choose either these comfort seats that look very pretty in cream with red stitching and the Daytona stripes, or the racier buckets. Now for some, those are a little bit too much. For me, these feel like they're almost the other way, not quite good enough. They're nowhere near as bad as the ones in my Maserati, which were frankly hopeless, and in a car like this would just be dangerous. But I do wish these were just a little bit more sculpted, held you in a little bit better, like the standard seats in old Ferraris used to. Perhaps this is simply a result of this car having some miles and usage on it and the padding being worn a little bit. I am going to see if there's a way of improving the seats without replacing them, but the jury's still out as to whether I'm going to keep these or not. Unfortunately, as you might imagine, replacement, quite expensive. This car really does find grip in places you wouldn't expect it to. Mid-engine cars always have a natural advantage by having the engine over the driven wheels, giving it a little bit better traction at all times. 911s even more so. The F12 copes far better than it has any right to. It's even really usable. This has nose lift, so little sections like here where there's rocks and a bit of a curb is no trouble whatsoever. Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. The view out is spectacular. You can actually see that bonnet and its wonderful little aero bridges. I've driven many a Lamborghini and R8 through an environment much like this, and the biggest problem with all of those wasn't the way that they drove. It was the fact that because you sit so far back and the windscreen is at such an extreme angle, you can just see the base of these hills. All this glorious view is hidden from you, and that's a shame. So then, how about that engine? You might reasonably expect anything with a 730 horsepower V12 to be utterly and totally dominated by it. And while it is certainly a star of the show, it's a testament to Ferrari's chassis engineers that at no point does it really overwhelm. Provided that you treat it with the kind of respect that any car with this sort of power needs, it is an absolute masterpiece. That being said, if you're looking for a car that can simply tear your face off with a moment's notice, a Tesla Model S or a Porsche Taycan Turbo will suit your needs far better. This is a more cultured and nuanced character. The power here is very linear and predictable, all the way from 2 to almost 9,000 RPM. And unlike the screaming 4-litre 6-pot in the Porsche 911 GT3 that I sampled recently, this allows you to make serious progress without requiring all of the revs. But when you decide the time is right and you want to call upon the thunder, the car will happily deliver. No matter what you ask of it, this always has a response. This really is a car for grown-ups. I've driven a lot of pretty quick things in my time, many of which you can simply hop in and drive quickly, no trouble at all. Every McLaren more or less fits that description. This takes a lot more time to truly appreciate what it can do. But the reward for me, for that very reason, is that much greater. You get in, say, the 430 Scuderia, drive it quickly, and it feels like you've conducted an orchestra with pinpoint precision. You have a great sense of satisfaction. This, though, is like conducting an orchestra of lions with a pepperami as a baton. At the end, if you've done it right, you'll have an enormous sense of achievement and also a little bit of gratitude that you've made it through alive. It will also deliver a rush that few other cars can really match. There's a lot of people out there that think every single modern car just drives itself and everything is easy. Clearly, those people haven't tried to give an F12 the big one, because if you disrespect this, regardless of what mode you're in, it will have you. I've driven quite a way to get here, 40 miles from London, and it was well worth it. This car actually is, to me, a super GT, not a supercar, because it does really well at the GT stuff. Okay, it's not perfect. Fuel economy is dire, about 16 the gallon when you're being gentle, and the range isn't as good as you'd like. You're filling up at every 200 and 250 miles. But ignoring that, the cabin actually isn't that bad. Compared, say, to a 911, it's pretty decent. And the ride is really very good. When you're in wet mode, the car is always in bumpy road. But even in sport, it's actually damped really nicely. If anything, for more spirited driving, bumpy road mode is too soft. You want the firmer settings you get in sport or race. The Aston Martin DBS, the Casino Royale spec one, and actually, to some extent, the later Superleggera 2, wouldn't actually be that pleasant on a road like this. You'd think they should be absolutely at home, but the fact is they're really quite stiffly damped, and although this section is pretty decent, the roads leading up to it, I think, are great fun. But in one of those, you'd just be getting battered about. Public reaction to the car is also through the roof. People love it. For me, the biggest part of owning a car like this is sharing your love with others. So many people have already had a sit in this car, taken photos with it, all that sort of stuff, and it gets a really, really rather good reception. Better, I would say, than many a mid-engine equivalent. Hold, please. This is that section of road. I'm in top gear. I am just in top gear. This is not a cheap car. Not cheap at all. But it's worth absolutely every penny. I think perhaps my greatest joy really is that not only have I been able to afford something like this, which I'm never really certain I was going to be able to, but that I've been able to bring all of you along for the ride. I've always had a thing about sharing a love of cars, and to be able to share it with the sheer quantity of people that I can now, that's magnificent. Much is often said about St. Jeremy and his Clarksonisms, but the fact is, he inspired an entire generation of people to really love cars. I'm proud to count myself among them. I've never met the man, I've never met any of the trio, in fact, but whenever I do, there's only one thing I ever really want to say to him. Thank you. Which, as it happens, is the exact same thing I want to say to all of you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. You didn't find it too preachy, because that's not how it was intended. Hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.